Comic fans, it's a special treat today. It's a conversation with Mark Waid from Boom Studios. And before we begin, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about these guys. Mark Waid is the editor-in-chief of the comic publisher Boom Studios. He is a popular comic book writer and editor, and he is known for his work on DC Comics' The Flash and Superman Birthright, as well as Marvel Comics' Fantastic Four and Captain America, which I'm a big fan of. Sorry, don't mean to goob out on you. And Jonah Weiland, he's the executive producer and owner of the website Comic Book Resources. The site tracks comic books, writers, and comic conventions. So ladies and gentlemen, comic book fans all throughout the quad, please welcome Jonah and Mark!
Alright everybody, it seems like most of you are comic fans. Are all of you guys comic fans? Or some of you new? I'm seeing a lot of new, okay, it sounds like a lot of new people. So just to further introduce Mark here, Mark is a guy who's had an incredible influence on my own life. He's been in the industry for more than almost 30 years now. He's been a writer for more than 20, and a very successful one at that. He's well known for his 8-year run on The Flash, which really redefined the character back in the 90s. And also in the 90s, he was part of the, he was the writer-scripter of Kingdom Come with Alice Ross, a book that had a huge influence on me and actually influenced the creation of Comic Book Resources. So I always have to say thanks to Mark for that.
My pleasure, sir.
These days, he's better known as the editor-in-chief.
Everybody still remembered Adam West's Batman, and studio executives still thought of comics and superhero comics as strictly just for kids or very slow adults. And what's happened in the last 20 years is that now those guys who were 14 and 15, who were there in the mid-'80s reading Dark Knight and reading Watchmen, now they run the studios. And now they're excited about this. Like they know that the form can be, regardless of the genre, the form can be legitimate. The form can tell good stories, and so they come embracing comics, looking for, to try to rekindle that same sense of excitement they had when they were 14, and try to disseminate that same excitement to movie audiences.
There were a number of movies that came out over the last 20 years that we'd like to forget, but they keep popping back up, and they're examples of how comics are bad when they cross the line.
Right.
Catwoman is probably the best example of that.
The Spirit.
The Spirit is a more recent example of that. How do we, as comics professionals, how do we as an industry make sure that those mistakes don't happen again, so that we don't have a moment where Hollywood says, maybe comics aren't such a good idea anymore?
You know what? I wish I knew. I honestly think that it's just a crapshoot, and hopefully, if Losers doesn't do well for whatever this weekend, or if Kick-Ass doesn't eventually meet expectations, people will still remember that Dark Knight was still one of the most profitable movies of all time. Iron Man will, I think, do extremely well and will buy us another couple of years. I think it's going to take more than, at this point, it's going to take more than 1 or 2 crashing, burning failures in a row. I think, like anything else, it'll cycle out, and eventually, that the energy will run out. But for the time being, there's nothing we can do to control it. So just enjoy the ride and cash the check.
There also seems to be a very big difference in the way they approach films these days. Tim Burton brought comics into the mainstream in a big way with Batman back in 1989, but that really was Tim Burton's Batman.
Yeah.
It wasn't the vision from the comics, it was his vision. Today, comic movies tend to be more faithful in a lot of ways. Is that a good movement?
Yeah, and you know what? Well, yeah. I mean, it's possible to be too faithful because it's if you're moving genres, if you're moving media, then it's perfectly acceptable to make whatever changes you need to make in order to make it. A good comic does not necessarily make a good movie. But that said, I think the guy who made faithful comic book movies a possibility was Sam Raimi,
right?
Because Spider-Man was just the most faithful adaptation of a comic book, of a big mainstream comic book character ever, and so. And he did it right, and it wasn't that they got every single little nuance of continuity exactly right, but the feeling of it, the spirit of Spider-Man, everything the character, it just felt like everybody who watched the movie felt like they got it right. The X-Men movie before that, they kind of got it right, but Spider-Man was where Sam Raimi got it exactly right, and that was proof of concept to show that if you're faithful to this stuff, then it'll work. And people kind of picked up on that. Iron Man is another great example. Marvel has been really, really good about picking the right people for their movies, the right directors, the right producers, and the right actors, and getting exactly the right feel.
We also have another movie coming out later this year that's not based on that is based on comics, but not on superheroes.
Yeah.
Movies like Scott Pilgrim.
Right.
Those tend to they seem to have a harder time catching with the public for some reason. Do you have any idea why? Any insight?
Only that they're not household brand names. Like, I mean, not that you could say Iron Man was either, but certainly, Spider-Man is, certainly Batman is. I think that's it. And I think that eventually one of those will catch. What I'd love to see is for one of those guys to catch fire, one of those sort of B-list or C-list comic book characters that, I'd like to see that catch fire and be a giant blockbuster. That opens up the doors for everybody in comics. It means that it just puts more excitement back into the medium.
But it seems though, within those smaller titles or those smaller characters, they do better on TV. Human Target on Fox is a great example of that. A very successful show. Nobody knew it was based on a comic.
Exactly.
But very, very successful. It seems like comics do really, really well on TV, especially with DC movies.
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't thought about the corollary. You're right. Marvel does better to movies, and DC does much better on television.
Smallville's been on for, I think, 40 years now?
I know, so 50, I know. I remember when I was a kid watching Smallville around my... Oh, it's funny if I could just come up with a joke. Never mind. I had it.
Within the comics industry...
Philco, around my Philco.
Yeah. Within the comics industry, there's a lot of excitement because Hollywood and television and bookstores, everybody's grabbed on to comics.
Yeah.
But there's always this concern because the comics industry, for those of you who don't know, has had its up and downs over the years. We had a really, really rough time at the end of the 90s there,
right.
And we've been crawling back and doing a very good job of it. But everybody asks, when is this bubble going to burst? I personally don't think it's going to burst for a long time. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I don't think it will. I think that obviously the print medium has to evolve, and I think that I don't think there's a single stage, program, interview, or anything that's happened at this event this entire weekend where somebody hasn't said that at least once. It's no giant truth I'm imparting. I mean, the print medium has to evolve. What we do has to evolve and adapt to electronic readers and adapt to, but still, a comic book page is a comic book page. The colorful stories, the exciting characters, that sort of thing. It's not dependent upon it being an actual physical pamphlet. And as long as we can get the message out there, as long as we can get people reading, I don't care what form it's in. So.
You brought up moving into the future and digital comics, and we're still kind of figuring that out as an industry. But motion comics have become kind of a flavor of the week within the comics industry, even in Hollywood. How many of you guys have checked out any of these motion comics, like Watchmen or Iron Man Extremis? Not a lot of hands went up there, unfortunately. Is that really comics, or is that an extension?
It's not. It's an interesting, it's an interesting experiment, but it's not comics. The thing about comics is, it's a unique medium in that only in comics do you have complete control over how you absorb, the pace at which you absorb the story. You turn the pages, you flip back and forth however you want, you read the balloons or look at the pictures as slowly or as quickly as you want, and in that way it's a very interactive medium. The moment you put a ticking clock on it, the moment you put sound or music or movement or anything that sort of takes that control of time away from me, the reader, and puts it in then it may still kind of be comics, but it's not quite comics. We're still looking to find what that X factor is. I've said this before too, and I apologize for repeating myself, but in the 1950s when television was invented, or became, it started to become a popular medium, it really was just radio with pictures. They didn't write for the screen. They were just, you could listen to any television show in the 1950s with a picture off and you could still get the whole thing. They were just doing radio programs, but people were moving around. They weren't doing anything visual. It took Lucille Ball and Milton Berle and people like that to bring vaudeville to radio and sort of meld those two together and create this thing now that we call television, because the burlesque and slapstick and visual stuff melded to radio becomes a whole new medium. With motion comics, digital comics, all that sort of thing, we're still looking for whatever that X factor is. How do you meld comics to something without it losing the essence of comics? That is the dullest answer I've ever given. But
that's a really interesting analogy that you made.
So let's really? Is it? No.
I think it is, because there was that huge transition, that radio to television that we went through. Is anybody doing motion comics right now, or they just haven't figured it out?
I think they're getting close. I think that, and clearly, if there's an audience for them, I look at them the same way I look at, novelizations or